So it was a great opportunity to review sort of the changes in the landscape of bladder cancer in general. So our conversation during the meeting was simple. We talked a little bit about the importance of adjuvant immunotherapy now that is FDA approved for patients with high-risk bladder cancer. That is for patients who have undergone local definitive curative treatment with surgery, whose pathology demonstrate high-risk features defined by a pathological T3, T4, or nodal disease in the absence of objective disease, meaning in the absence of metastatic disease defined by negative scans. Obviously, nivolumab, which is a PD-1 inhibitor, is now an FDA-approved agent for those patients based upon the data that demonstrated that you can delay disease-free survival. And although survival benefit is immature, it was quite interesting to see that you can actually drive an improvement in outcome for a selected group of patients. I think the challenge of that data is that traditionally we continue to use perioperative chemotherapy with cisplatin-based therapy before surgery, and certainly in the adjuvant space as well. And that data, at least in the adjuvant space, although imperfect in many ways because it's all flow to some extent, the meta-analysis of the adjuvant chemotherapy trials clearly demonstrate a survival advantage for those who get chemotherapy, specifically for those with high-risk disease. So that's sort of the limitation of the nivolumab data, that we don't have survival data yet. Now, we also talk about the changes in the management of advanced bladder cancer. That is for those patients who are chemotherapy fit. There are two pockets of patients. One group of patients who actually are cisplatin fit, for which the standard of care remains today cisplatin-based chemotherapy, 4 to 6 cycles. And the new wave of treatment is the addition of maintenance PD-L1 based approaches such as avelumab. So that is the Javelin 100 data demonstrates survival benefit for those patients with metastatic disease who receive platinum-based therapy, a median of 4 to 6 cycles of chemotherapy, achieving a stable disease or best response as a PR to stable PR or CR, moving forward with avelumab against placebo. And again, the arm receiving avelumab demonstrates survival benefits. So that's the newest standard of care for us in the United States. So if you cannot get cisplatin-based therapy because of cisplatin unfitness, often defined by renal dysfunction, hearing loss, peripheral neuropathy, and/or cardiovascular disease, then used to be that immunotherapy with single-agent pembrolizumab was an attractive option for us. Nowadays, I think with the Javelin data, I think most of us probably feel more comfortable moving the patient to carboplatin-based approaches, followed by maintenance avelumab. It is fair to say that if you cannot get chemotherapy whatsoever, single-agent immunotherapy would be a reasonable choice as well. Now, we also talk about what to do for patients who progress after chemotherapy, and that really resides on two things. If you have, I think the standard of care right now in the United States after platinum-based therapy is to receive immunotherapy. If you have not seen it, specifically pembrolizumab with the keynote data for many years ago, I think that if you get immunotherapy in the maintenance space, then that sequence change. And now for those patients, likely is going to be enfortumab vedotin, which is an antibody drug conjugate that we now are using for that patient population. So that data actually demonstrate robust responses, RECIST defined, and also significant survival benefit on their phase 3 data. Equally important is the genomics aspects of bladder cancer. When we talk about FGFR amplification or FGFR changes that allows our patients with bladder cancer the opportunity to receive an FGFR inhibitor known as erdafitinib. Although that data has been published, that data does not have survival benefit, has response and progression data, but certainly a biomarker-driven approach for a selected, small but selected group of patients, and a viable options for those with FGFR mutational changes. And also another antibody drug conjugate, also known as sacituzumab govitecan. Again, an antibody drug conjugate similar to EV or enfortumab vedotin, but with a different palo, which is sort of the the chemotherapy, that this cytotoxic aspect of the antibody drug conjugate when it gets into the cell. That data also has shown a solid response rate in the third line setting, pretty much, and also some disease, progression-free improvement, although survival data is not there yet, just by virtue of the clinical trial design. So the sequence is chemo, followed by immunotherapy, followed by EV or SACIG. I think with survival benefit, probably EV before SACIG, in my opinion. And then a selected group of people will get erdafitinib, the FGFR inhibitor, if they have the mutational changes for it. For those who have seen chemo followed by maintenance, then there is no role to do more immunotherapy when you progress. So EV gets moved closer to that second line space, and you still have those options of erdafitinib if you have the appropriate genomic profiling, and or sacituzumab govitecan if you progress on EV. So that's sort of the sequence. We also talk a little bit about biomarker-driven approaches, and I think perhaps is a recognition that circulating tumor DNA may in fact become a very good biomarker for us to define who may be at risk to develop progression of disease after cystectomy, and certainly in the maybe perioperative chemotherapy. And there's some elegant data from Dr. Pauls and his group demonstrate the importance of that, using Signatera, which is a molecular profile that basically looks at circulating tumor DNA, if you will. So for patients who actually still have the presence of circulating tumor DNA after therapy, they have a significant detriment in outcome compared to those who don't have the presence of circulating tumor DNA. I think that we're still pretty early in that biomarker development. Certainly, that was actually done on one of the atezolizumab adjuvant trials, and certainly something that a lot of people in our bladder cancer community are sort of adopting as a way to stratify patients and define their risk as they move forward from perioperative treatments to surgery to advanced disease. Certainly, there are going to be many other clinical trials that are ongoing that are going to reshape how we manage patients in bladder cancer. There's a very unique trial that looks at the combination of pembrolizumab, the PD-1 inhibitor, plus enfortumab vedotin, and as an antibody drug conjugate together. And the published data that we have seen is quite impressive for response and also progression-free. So that data actually has been publicly announced that the trial has met the primary endpoint, and all of us in the community are anxious to see the full final report and how that combination move forward in the management of our advanced bladder cancer patients.